Welcome to the Illinois Divorce Guide podcast, where we break down the complex and emotional process of divorce into manageable, easy-to-understand steps. I'm your host, Greer Howard, and with me is Bobby Buchanan, widely recognized as one of Illinois' top divorce attorneys, offering unmatched insight and experience in family law. Well, we are back for another episode, and today we are talking about divorce and the house, and we are going to talk through some myths today that can sabotage settlements. Dun, dun, dun. I feel like we need some music there, Bobby, because it sounds very, very heavy. But honestly, we were talking about it before we got on the podcast today. Your home is so personal. Your home can be a place of safety that, you go to, a place of peace. And then all of a sudden you're going through a divorce and there's all of this fear surrounding your home. It can be financial fear. It can be the fear of not feeling safe at home, or where are you going to be? And just this new attachment that maybe you didn't even know or realize that you had before. So, Bobby, let's dig in to the myths about divorce and when it comes to your home. And let's just kind of start it off with, why this feels so personal.
Yeah, absolutely. Greer, great to be back. Great to be talking about divorce and all the angles that come with it. And the home is such a personal one. As we were preparing for this episode and talking about it, and as I think through it right now, I'm just thinking about 4 years ago when Kathleen and I bought our home. And I was telling you earlier just how much we love the location. It's near great schools, parks, the neighbors are awesome. And it was a really key part of us building our family. And I can only imagine if I ever had to go through a divorce, and knock on wood, and I don't think that that'll ever happen, but I'm sure that a lot of our listeners said these very same things when they got married and were raising their little kids. Giving up that home would be really hard. And I think that I like to think of myself as pretty diplomatic and pragmatic. And I'm the one that preaches about, let's get through our divorce without fighting about it and spending all our money on attorney's fees. But that home would be a big sticking issue. I'm sure it would be, because there's so much sentimental attachment to the home. And I think that that's really what we're talking about. Not only is it our biggest asset, but the memories that we have with the home and what it stands for, and just what it gives our kids. They get to walk to school basically from kindergarten until high school, which is incredible. So all of those things put together just make it really sticky when we're talking about divorce.
Yes, yes. I mean, like you said, for all of those reasons, just your home, it can be so emotional. And so today we're going to talk through some of those myths so we can kind of get a little bit of a better idea of, what the reality might actually be. So first off, we're going to start with, okay, if I bought the house, it's mine. This is our myth number one. If I bought the house, it's mine. So can I give you a scenario, maybe, Bobby, and we can sort of talk through the scenario?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So this is hypothetical, but let's say that Carlos, he bought a home 6 months before he married Julia. Now they lived there together for 12 years. That's a long time, Bobby. And now he says, it's mine. I bought it. What do you think?
I think this is a great hypothetical to start with, because it allows us to explore really what the law is around the house and what is marital property, what's non-marital property. So just a little recap: Illinois law, we are what's called an equitable distribution state, which means that at the time of divorce, we have to figure out what is marital property, and that's the stuff that we divide. And we don't automatically divide it 50-50, although most of the time that is how the chips fall. It's what is fair. And usually judges say that 50-50 is fair, but there's some wiggle room there. In other states, there's not any wiggle room. So when we talk about the home, we got to figure out, is this marital property? Now, this hypothetical is actually on the same side as the myth. And what I mean by that is, if the house was purchased before the marriage and it's just Carlos on the deed, then there might be there's probably some truth to this when he says it is mine. But the fact that they have been there for 12 years, they've been paying the mortgage has been paid by maybe let's make it even more lopsided. Just Carlos paid the mortgage from his job. There's a good argument that a fair amount of the equity in the house is marital. So the judge could say, well, all of the mortgage payments were made from marital money. Remember, if during the marriage, all of the income that comes into the home, whether or not it's put just in Carlos's solo bank account or a joint bank account, is marital money. So yes, Carlos, the house is yours, but some of the equity might have to be split with Julia. So that's one, like that. This is one of the more complex or gray areas, if you will, when the house was purchased before, but a lot of the mortgage payments came after the marriage.
So in a situation like this, do you typically see, can you see different outcomes? Like maybe whatever the down payment was, like maybe he keeps that, but then everything from once they were married, like they split that equity. I mean, is that just kind of part of the negotiation? Because, also, I mean, if the title of the home is in his name, or is it the mortgage? Because those are two separate things. If the mortgage is in his name, that would be harder for her to take over, like, the house, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could have a scenario here where the parties agree that actually Julia is going to take possession of the house, in which case we got to figure out how is she going to take over the mortgage. That's the biggest one that we have to figure out, because taking over a mortgage is not the same as just taking over the deed. I can get your name on the deed tomorrow by filling out some paperwork. In order to get your name on the mortgage, a bank has to approve that, and that's a relationship between you and the bank. It has nothing to do with what the court says or what your spouse agrees to. So usually in cases like this, Carlos is going to keep the house. There's going to be a negotiated credit to Julia for the equity in the house. So that might be some sort of equalization payment that is made by Carlos. He might have to do a cash out refi from the house to get some cash so he can pay Julia her share of the equity. So, and like you said, the down payment as well. Let's figure out where the down payment came from. And that might go back to the original source. The thing that'll change this drastically is if the house was purchased before the marriage, but both of their names are on the house, in which case it's definitely going to be split. Now, let's flip the hypothetical on its head and say that Carlos did buy the house. It's just in his name. He's made all the mortgage payments himself. His money from his job has just gone into his own account, but it was all done after the marriage, in which case Carlos doesn't have a leg to stand on. This house is clearly marital, and Julia is going to get half of all the equity, or an equitable distribution of all the equity, regardless of what Carlos thinks. So really when the house was purchased in relationship to the marriage date is the biggest factor here.
Okay, so, this makes me think, Bobby, if you are potentially going through a divorce and as a couple you own a home, what are the things that you probably need to find out? Because you could probably save some money by knowing the information and bringing this to your attorney, because it makes me think, like, should they go ahead and find out that information? When was the home bought? Was that before you were married? After you
Right.
were married? Like, what are some of those things that maybe it'd be a good idea to just go ahead, find out what that information is so that you could go to your attorney and then you could make a plan together?
Yeah, and if you get this information together, it might even make just negotiating this easier with your
Mhm.
spouse. So figure out, when was the house bought. Sometimes if it was 15 years ago, you don't even remember whether or not it was before or after the marriage. Figure out what is the mortgage balance, and then what is the fair market value of the house. That's a little bit harder to do. There might be some disagreement if you're going to do this. And let's say that me and my spouse are on the same page of, like, let's get this done as rationally as possible, but we can't agree on what the fair market value is. What can we do? Well, you can hire an appraiser. You don't need to do it through a lawyer. You can find an appraiser. It's a few $100s. They come out to your house and they do a comprehensive report, and they give you a final report that tells you the fair market value. And if you and your spouse agree, like, hey, we're going to choose the appraiser together, we're going to go with their report, we're going to stick to the number they give us, then that's a great negotiation foundation, is knowing that number.
Yeah, because I feel like having that information might help someone to not have as much fear. Because when you have the information, then you can make a plan and have realistic expectations about, what could actually happen with your home, right?
You might have this idea that the house is worth a lot more than it is, or that there's a lot to be fighting over here, but sometimes the reality makes things simpler. Maybe you get the appraisal and realize, oh, wait a minute, there's not as much equity in this house as I thought, and it doesn't make sense to fight over it, and it simplifies things. So the more information, the better. That's very true.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's get to another myth. What about, it always complicates things and it gets even more emotional when kids are involved. So let's say the kids need to stay in the house, so I get the house. And here's another hypothetical situation for you. So Tina is the primary parent and she wants to keep the house for the kids, but she can't afford the payment solo. What do you think?
I think Tina has a challenge in front of her, that's for sure. So the court looks at, let's say that Tina's spouse, let's call him Tom, he agrees that the kids are better off with Tina, that she is going to be the primary caretaker. She's going to be in charge of getting them to school, getting them home, making sure they get through the school week and have that stability, because he's working, he's traveling for work, whatever the case may be. That's an easy one for them. But they don't agree on what's going to happen with the house, because Tina hasn't had the same sort of career that Tom has had, so she can't go to the bank and get the mortgage and make the payments. So what do we do? Well, Tina's really got two options here. Either she moves. I mean, that's just practically speaking, that's what has to be done. She can't stay in a house. There's never going to be a scenario where, well, I'm never going to say never, but it's rare that Tina would stay and Tom would continue to pay the mortgage. Although it can happen. Let's say, for example, Tom makes a very good living. He's going to have to pay Tina maintenance anyway. That can be used for her to get a mortgage. And this is why people need to go and establish a relationship with a mortgage broker during this process to learn, what do you need to see in order to get me a mortgage on this house? And usually it's about 6 months of maintenance payments or something like that. They'll tell you the specifics, but you can get a mortgage based on your maintenance, also known as alimony payments. So that's one option. So let's give her three options. She's either got to move because it's too expensive. She does get a mortgage based on the maintenance payments. Or the third one is she could get a family member to co-sign on the mortgage for her. So again, this is a relationship between her and the bank. If she goes to the bank and says, what are my options here? They say, well, do you have any relatives that might have enough credit here? And it's like, oh yeah, my sister does, or my mom does. And they co-sign. That's a viable option. I mean, the name of the game here is get Tom off of the mortgage and get Tom his share of the equity. If there is enough, if the family member who's co-signing is enough to do those two things, then Tina can keep the house.
Okay, so Tina can keep the house if she can find a way to afford the house, but we don't want Tina to go bankrupt by having just to have the house, right?
No, and a judge isn't just going to give Tina the house because the kids need to live there. I mean, the judge is going to look at practical things as far as, is this feasible? And again, I just say judge and use judge as kind of the North Star, because that's where we based all negotiations from. 9 times out of 10, a judge isn't going to be saying anything in your case. You're going to get this all done by negotiation, keeping your case private and more fast and less attorney's fees.
Yeah. All right, well, let's move on to another myth. Myth number 3 here. We have to sell the house during the divorce. So the house has to be sold. Um, let's talk about this hypothetical. Dave says, she's forcing me to list the house. Do I have to sell it before the divorce is final?
Short answer is no, you don't, Dave. You're good to go. Don't worry. You can get divorced before your house is sold. And a lot of people do think that this is the case. Like, you got to have everything wrapped up and divided before your divorce is final. And what we actually do in a divorce is we just write out the agreement. So let's say, for example, that Dave's wife, Shirley, is going to be, she's actually going to be the one staying in the house, and Dave's going to move out. But Shirley needs more time to refinance to get Dave his share of things. But they want to get divorced before that. What they're going to do is put in the agreement that Shirley has 6 months to refinance and to give Dave his share of the equity. And what we're also going to say in the agreement is that if she does not refinance within that time, then the house is sold. So we can work out all these contingencies before the divorce is final. Then we sign off on it. Then Dave moves out. Then Shirley works on the refinance, and we're good to go. Or if they just agreed that they are going to sell the house, maybe they agree that we're going to finalize the divorce, and then we're going to list the house. And while the house is listed, Dave is going to live in the house, and he's going to pay the mortgage and pay all the utilities. You want to work out those details just so there's no disagreements or confusion. But we can figure that all out before the divorce is finalize it, and then do all the things.
Yeah, I feel like I've heard a lot of personal stories that, about selling a home that can really vary based off of a couple's situation. Like, for instance, there may be someone who has an older child who's in high school. And so they agree, hey, let's just keep the house for 2 more years until the oldest graduates, and then we're going to agree that we're going to sell. Or maybe the interest rates are really bad at the moment, or the housing market has tanked, and so they feel like they're not getting their full value. Are you seeing that from time to time, that there's sort of this individual, based off their individual situation, that when they're selling their home can really vary depending on the couple?
Yeah, divorce is a creative endeavor more than anything. There's no pre-written rules on how this has to be done. And the smartest divorces are the ones that are tailored specifically to the family situation. So if it makes sense for the kids to be staying in the house for just a few more years while they get through high school, then let's make sure that we don't sell the house. Because I remember when I was a kid, my parents, for a short amount of time, talked about moving from my childhood home. They were trying to figure out financially if it made sense for them to stay there. And I just remember feeling devastated that we were going to move. All my friends were there. This is where I grew up, and I just hated the idea of moving. We didn't eventually move, but for a kid, moving is scary and overwhelming, and if we can prevent it, then let's prevent it. So yeah, there's definitely some options there.
Yeah, I love that it's not always a black and white answer. That I love that it can be tailored for someone's, situation. All right, well, let's get to another myth here. Myth number 4: if I keep the home, I'm financially secure. So let's talk about Maria. She kept the house and she gave up her share of her husband's 401k. And now she can't afford the major repairs or the taxes, and she feels stuck, Bobby.
Yeah, well, Maria probably kept the home because she had I think the mistake happens here when people have a really strong emotional attachment to something, but they're not really thinking through the practical side of things. And that owning a home it's not a bank account that you're getting. It's an asset, but there's also can be a serious downside to it. The upkeep of a house, the mortgage payments. You don't know what the housing market is going to do. Historically, we look at houses as this appreciating asset, but it's possible in downtimes for the value of your home to go down. And so if you're not in a good financial position to handle all of that, that can be a problem. So we really want to get very practical, look at our finances before we commit to taking on this house so that we don't get stuck like Maria. So what are Maria's options at this point? I mean, she's going to have to sell the house, but she doesn't get the benefit of selling it during the divorce process, meaning she's going to have to take on all the fees herself. She's going to have to take on all the legwork. She's going to have to pay all the associated taxes with any, capital gains issues or anything like that.
Yeah. That that's a great, reminder of if you're considering, can I afford to keep the home? It's not only the mortgage payment, right? It's thinking about, well, does it need a new roof in a few years? Or are the air conditioning units not working? Or does it need to be repainted? Or, there's all, like you were saying, all this upkeep that it's not just simply paying the mortgage and it's not giving money back to you. So you need to make sure you've got enough cash to be able to kind of handle, some of those things that might come your way. So I think that's a really good thing to remember. In her situation, it might have just been better to sell the house and get her share of the 401k and be on her merry way.
Yeah, I mean, get on to the next chapter. Let go of that house that maybe, it's hard to be thankful for the house if you're really concerned about money.
Sure.
Right? When we're tight on money, it's hard to really relax and be content no matter where we are. Money and freedom are closely related. So if she had more money, if she wasn't attached to that house, I'm guessing that she would feel like she had a lot more options.
For sure. All right. Well, let's get to another myth. Myth number 5. We can always revise the home agreement later. John agreed that his ex could refinance the house in 3 years. And it's year 4, Bobby, and she hasn't done it. Well, now what?
Now what? Well, John's ex-wife is going to have to. There's 2 options here, because the first one is probably in the agreement. It says that if she doesn't refinance it on time, the house is going to be sold, like we talked about earlier. So she's going to be in somewhat of a pickle here. If she is staying in the house, it's going to be forced to be sold. But she says, well, I don't want it to be sold. I want to change my agreement. She calls a lawyer. She says, hey, I need another year. Can you let's change the agreement. What the lawyer is going to say is, no, property agreements are non-modifiable. Other areas of agreements in the divorce process are modifiable. Custody agreements are modifiable. Support amounts are modifiable. Those are the 2 big ones. Both maintenance and child support can be modifiable. You need a good reason to do it, but it's possible to do it. When it comes to property, you cannot modify it. You can't change it. So she's going to be SOL here unless John agrees. So that's really the only way that this is going to work. If he's lenient and he says, fine, take another year, but that's it, then she's okay, which people do. I mean, it does happen. I mean, if in going to court to enforce agreement is kind of a pain in the ass anyway. So sometimes it's easier to give your spouse a little bit more time or whatever they need, but you can't let it go on indefinitely.
Right. Okay. Final myth here, Bobby. I can kick my spouse out of the house. Hypothetically, Amy says she's too stressed and her husband is around. Can she file to have him kicked out?
This is one of the hardest parts about divorce when you're living together, is the fact that you have to continue to live together while you're trying to work out these things that are not so comfortable to work out. And so can Amy, If Amy says to her spouse, get out, I can't stand to look at you, I don't want to live under the same roof as you, you need to move out. And he says, no, I'm not moving out. She calls her lawyer and she says, what can I do? Her options are very limited. There's a motion called a motion for exclusive possession of the home, where you can ask the judge to kick them out. But the burden is very high. You can't just do it because the other person annoys you. You can't just do it because you guys get into fights every night. Even if there's yelling matches, you can't do it. Now, if there are kids and those yelling matches are really bad, then it possibly could get to that level where the judge says this is not good for the kids. But it's not automatically going to be your spouse that's kicked out. The judges, might look and say, you're the problem. So getting your spouse out of the house is not as simple as just going to the court and asking them to get out. The big exception here, and really important one, is, of course, if there is abuse, physical abuse going on, then absolutely you can get your spouse kicked out of the house. It's called an order of protection. It's called an emergency order of protection. So if that sort of thing is happening, you need to be in touch with the police. You need to be in touch with your lawyer. And there are things that we can do to make that happen. But I think what we're talking about here is just the normal stress of going through a divorce, and you want your spouse out. You can't do it. And really the quickest way to get them out is get through the divorce. And that's how you do it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Bobby, lots that we covered today about divorce and when it comes to your home. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, Greer, I think the biggest thing to take away is that although the house is emotional, that it represents the beginning of your marriage, that if you get too stuck to that and wanting it, it can cause a lot of problems. It can cause your divorce to go on longer. It can cause you to get stuck with maybe a financial burden more than an asset. So we need to do the work internally to let go of the house so that we can make the most practical decisions during the divorce process.
Yeah. And I think I learned, one of the things that I feel like was really valuable is just going ahead and getting the information, right? Empower yourself to know, when was the house, purchased, and who put down the down payment? Were you married? Were you not? Are you on the deed? Are you on the mortgage? How much is your home even worth? So I think finding out some of that information can really help you to, understand, what this could even look like, because it might be too difficult to keep the house, or it might be very reasonable to keep the house. And so I think having that knowledge just kind of empowers you to start this conversation, because there are, like you said, in this, typically it can be, a very specific, unique agreement that is right for, for your situation. It's not necessarily a black and white answer. So another reason why I think you need an attorney involved.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks so much for being here with us today. Any questions, let us know, and we'll be back next Tuesday for another episode.
Thank you for listening to the Illinois Divorce Guide podcast. We hope today's episode gave you clarity and support as you move forward on your journey. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Tune in next week for more insights and expert advice on the Illinois Divorce Guide podcast.